uh, to, to work. So once again, welcome at the meeting where we will discuss global dexterity. And I'm really happy, Andy, that we have a chance also to meet here in our webinar around the world in a day. So maybe first question also well, others were curious about. So how this global dexterity appeared and what is exactly global dexterity about?
So good to see you all. Sorry to come in a little late, but happy to be here. So global dexterity is about adapting and adjusting your behavior across cultures to sort of accommodate norms and expectations in a new setting, but also to do it in a way that feels authentic to you. So without losing yourself in the process. So early on when I started this work, there were a couple of different themes that I noticed very early on that in the cross-cultural field. One was that there seemed to be a trade-off between effectiveness and authenticity. In other words, you could be effective or inauthentic, or you could be authentic and not be effective. In other words, if you're effective but not authentic, it means you're suppressing who you are. And if you're authentic but not effective, it's just being yourself, but not being, appropriate, let's say. I also noticed in the literature that culture was sort of seen as some sort of national culture that's sort of imprinted upon you. I think Hofstede even uses the metaphor of cultural imprinting. So that's sort of the software of the mind, which has sort of a static, kind of quasi-permanent quality. The work that I did in the field, my research, well before Global Dexterity was published, I published a lot of academic articles, did a lot of academic research, sort of showing that culture is more malleable, that culture is more like a toolkit. It's something that people can use actively, proactively. They have agency. And furthermore, they can do it in creative ways so that they can find a way to be themselves, or at least be close to themselves, or at least feel more authentic, or authentic enough, let's say, to be willing to adapt and adopt the norms in a foreign setting. So that's what global dexterity is. It's it originated out of my PhD dissertation in the late 90s, a bunch of academic research, and then ultimately the book Global Dexterity was published in 2013. So does that answer your question?
Yes, definitely, yes. So how exactly it happened that you got into the file, of being into the intercultural research? So how it happened? I'm really curious because I even never asked you about this.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in I'm an old guy, as you can tell. I grew up in an era before the internet. I couldn't just click on Google and sort of see different parts of the world and so on. So I lived in a very sort of monocultural household. I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, where I actually am now. And both my parents are US born, never traveled outside the country and so on. But I was always fascinated by foreign languages. And I took some different languages in college. I took Russian in college. I took Spanish in college. I ultimately studied in Spain. And that was really a life-changing experience for me. I had never been in a foreign culture. I'd never used a foreign language, nothing. I just became fascinated by it. Just the fact that there was this whole world that existed out there of people, I don't know, this other part of the world where people are speaking this language and having, somewhat different norms in their society, and they were just getting along just fine, but it was different from what I was used to. I then went back to college, finished up, and then I went to graduate school in international business. Very soon after I started a program in international business, I realized that I knew nothing about international business. I better try it. So I took a leave of absence from that program and decided to go to France. And I worked for a small French consulting firm. I learned French kind of on the fly. I had never studied it, but I learned it fairly quickly just because I love languages. And I lived and worked there. And that's where I started to really become interested in this stuff. I was working in an office that was multicultural, multilingual. And I just became fascinated. I had like a little computer at my desk, and I was doing my job. My job was super boring. Not gonna lie, it was a super boring job. It was like, I think they were doing like customer satisfaction surveys for industrial companies. Maybe that's interesting to you. It wasn't interesting to me at the time, definitely not. However, what was happening in the office was super interesting. So I had my little computer, it was one of those early Mac computers. It was like a little box, and like Mac SE, and I would keep a diary on there of all these things that I was observing, sort of like an anthropologist. Now, I never studied anthropology. I never studied psychology. I never studied culture. I never studied any of this. It just was interesting to me. And so I kept taking all these notes and notes and notes and notes. And when I left France and went back to finish my program, this was at Columbia University in New York City, which is a huge university with lots of different options. And I came back and I started to like try to figure out like, what is this subject I'm interested in? I didn't even have the words to I didn't know what it was. I learned it was social psychology. I learned there was a field called organizational behavior. And I learned there was a whole academic world about this kind of stuff. And so I finished up at Columbia and I decided, hey, maybe this is something I actually want to do. What would it be like to get a PhD? What would it be like to be a professor and to do research in this area? And then one thing led to the next, and I ultimately did a PhD at Harvard in organizational behavior and psychology. Along the way, I got a master's in psychology. So the psychology piece, and I got a PhD in organizational behavior. It was a cool program because it was a joint program between Harvard Business School and the Harvard Psychology Department. So you got sort of the best of both worlds. From there, I took the academic track. My first job was at the University of Southern California. I was super interested in this topic, and my PhD dissertation, actually, as I was writing my PhD, which was essentially about global dexterity. I was also simultaneously working at a resettlement agency in Boston, helping. At the time, there were people from the former Soviet Union coming to the United States, trying to find jobs, learn to network, learn to make small talk, learn to interview, all these things that were very unusual and different for them and very hard for them, sort of culturally and psychologically. And I was working with them on the ground. And so I was starting to see that what I was talking about before, I was starting to see that they were trying to like adapt and adjust and find ways of being authentic, but being effective. And they were doing all these very creative things. But then when I went back to my office and was reading the literature, it was very boring and static, and it was nothing at all what I was seeing in the real world. And that inspired me to direct my research towards what I was seeing, the phenomenon I was seeing in the real world. And that sort of started me off. And from there, I've done this in a variety of done research in a variety of different contexts, but also, as you know, Monika, training and writing and teaching and so on. And so that's where it started, though.
Yeah, so exactly, then we are here talking about
we're here.
dexterity, and we had a chance before you join us. We were discussing about challenges which we are facing as well, and or personally, or also our clients, which I'm mentioning. So, for example, Claudia said that she's very often hearing that is it just us that we need to learn about other culture, or like adjust our behavior to their and what about this other parties? Well, Jeffrey mentioned that this is just a part, what we are doing. So okay, we know what we have to do at work, but then it's this also personal aspect. So how these challenges explain, or how you perceived in global dexterity, because of course the psychological challenges as well, personal one, they are part of a global dexterity method and what we should discuss there.
So what are the psychological challenges?
Yes. Yes, how exactly these challenges, it's just us, others, what we should learn, who we are, and so on. So how we could address this in global dexterity.
Yeah, so I think it's like when you write a book or you come up with something, you have to sort of narrow it to a domain. You can't write about everything. So you have to kind of zero in on something. And so I zeroed in and focused on situations, and understanding what, focusing on situations as the arena that people sort of experience their professional lives, key situations, participating in a meeting, asking for feedback from your boss, like the very concrete, specific, circumscribed situations. And in those situations, I developed this idea of the cultural code, that there's a set of 6 different dimensions along which the norms or the rules could vary in a situation. And that situation, it's not the national culture only that shapes the norms in that situation, the code, as I call it. It's also the regional culture. It could be the organizational culture. It could be the background of the particular people who are leading that situation, and so on. There are multiple factors that can come together to generate what would be the cultural code, the norm, what I call the zone of appropriateness for how to act along a different series of different dimensions in a particular situation. The psychological challenges in this context arise when your own personal comfort zone for how to behave in a particular situation. And I have a different dimensions, like the level of enthusiasm, the level of directness, the level of formality, and so on, things like that. When your personal comfort, when there's a gap between the zone of appropriateness in that situation and your personal comfort zone, when there's a gap, that's what can generate these, what I call psychological challenges. And the ones that I focus on are authenticity, the feeling that this doesn't feel like me, which is natural, of course, when you're trying to step outside your cultural comfort zone, right? Likability. What if people don't like this version of me? Like how I need to act in this situation? What if people don't like that version? I'm not used to it. I haven't sort of internalized that identity. Competence. What if I'm bad at this? And well, by the way, what if I'm bad at this? But what if other people can see that I'm bad at this, right? And then resentment. I found that in some cases, people logically understand when in Rome, act like the Romans. They know they need to act in a certain way. Maybe they're even capable of it, but they feel resentful, annoyed, frustrated, angry, resentful about the fact that they have to do it in the first place. So you could feel inauthentic, you could feel incompetent, you could worry about how likable you'll be seen, you could worry about, you could feel resentful. Any one of these can generate emotions, negative emotions, potentially negative, intense emotions, potentially. Multiple of them can generate sort of like a cocktail of emotions. And the problem is that when you're feeling negative, strong emotions, and by the way, you're not always going to feel this in all situations. It's only when there's a gap. If there's an overlap, if your comfort zone meets how you need to act in a situation, you probably won't feel much of this at all. But in certain key situations, you very well might. And the problem in the paradox of global dexterity is that global dexterity is about adapting and adjusting your behavior, about being flexible, right? That's the essence of global dexterity. But what psychology teaches us is that it's very difficult. It's actually the hardest time to be flexible is when you're feeling strong negative emotions. If you think about it, the last time you were super stressed about something, it probably wasn't the time where you're most flexible, like intellectually, creative, you narrow, people narrow. They go to their sort of dominant learned behavior when they're feeling high levels of stress and anxiety. But the problem is that in a global dexterity context, they have to do the complete opposite. They have to somehow be able to adapt and adjust. So then the question becomes, how can you learn to manage yourself and the situation in order to reduce the likelihood of feeling these emotions and these psychological conflicts, so that you're capable of sort of finding that middle ground, finding a way to be effective and also authentic at the same time. So that's sort of the challenge. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely, yes. I believe that each of us, we struggle with this, like what is mine and how can I feel more authentic, and also that other people and myself will like how I behave and how am I now, and also when I change, it's like I'm feeling that it's not me. I struggle a lot with this, even when I moved to Portugal, and I'm quite direct. And there a lot of time I heard it, oh, you are not nice, because I was not adding please in the end of the sentence, or also my mimic were much more serious than that I am now. So just after 1 year, I heard from my colleagues like, yeah, you are finally one of us. That like you find your way. But at the beginning, I struggle a lot. And of course, it was this resentment, like, I don't want to be like this, right? I have my way of being. I see that Anna as well shared that self-awareness seems to have a massive role in that authenticity, right? So I believe that global dexterity it's all about as well self-awareness, right?
Yes, I think self-awareness is a big part of it, and I think that's a key role that a coach and a trainer can have in this, or teacher, in this context, is helping people become aware, using these tools and this language to help people develop that self-awareness. I think sometimes having words and language in a sort of a logical way of sense making in a situation, that itself can reduce anxiety, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's Jeffrey, I saw that you raised your hand, so just a second, just finish this thought. So I'm seeing a lot of time in with the workshop when they run, or even when I participate, or at school, how we are teaching. It's much more about this national culture. So Polish people are like this, Americans are like this. And I remember even Andy, during our course, I was participating in the huge amount of people. They were from US, and one girl from my team, she said like, I'm not a typical American. I have shock culture, right? When I move from one city to another, because I'm much more shy, much more quiet, and we even perceived how, for example, Americans are when we look at the big scope from other stools. So Jeffrey, if you would like to share your thoughts or ask the question.
No, just in response to what Andy was saying, that was interesting about those psychological components that you mentioned. I written them down. Authenticity, which is kind of a really ambiguous word. I mean, authenticity, because very often you just fall upon some other kind of word. But those are really interesting, Andy. And I'm just wondering, just to resolve all of that, those psychological dimensions, I'm wondering if it becomes more of an interpersonal exercise where this just needs to be within a business team, for example. Does this just simply need to be talked about among a team, among colleagues, how I feel about these certain things, kind of laying the ground rules of how much or how far I'm going to go to adapt to this new situation?
Yeah, in the context, I mean, so the Global Dexterity book, in the method, is focused on the individual, in the sense that I talk about what individuals, people who are caught in that web of challenges that we're talking about, what they can do to try to get out of it. And the tools that I talk about, the main tool is what I call customization, which is sort of like finding a way to customize your mindset, how you think about the situation, and also customizing, even more importantly, often customizing your behavior, finding ways. I mean, people often feel that there's sort of like, I don't know, that they have to sort of hit the bullseye of some sort of archery target of behavior in a new culture to be effective. But the reality is that oftentimes there's more of a range than they think, and they can find a place in a way to be themselves and stay in that range by sort of tweaking, making minor adjustments in the way that they act or speak or whatever, so that they're both effective and appropriate, but also feel comfortable enough for themselves. I mean, I could give some examples, but those are the strategies that the main strategy. And then of course, learning to internalize that and so on, through repetition and practice and increasingly challenging situations and so on. But in terms of a team, the Global Dexterity approach, like the book itself, in the work that I've done, has not focused on the team level. Not that it's not important, it is important, but I've focused my work more on the individual level. Now, I understand that, much work happens in teams. And so, I think that there's a whole host of things that can be done in teams to create, a safe, inclusive atmosphere for people from different cultures to recognize, just even the exercise of sharing. I do trainings, let's say, with an intact team, and I'll have people choose situations that are outside their personal or cultural comfort zone. I'll have them diagnose the code and where their gaps are in the team context and share their results. I'll have them identify what the psychological roadblocks they experience are. Sometimes if I have multiple teams, I'll have each team talk at the team level, like on our team, how many people out of the 5 people here felt the authenticity challenge? How many felt the likability challenge? And then we report it out at the team level, and so on. And just an exercise like that starts to develop empathy, insight. It normalizes also the fact that this is something that a lot of people struggle with. And when it's normalized, you don't, I mean, it probably becomes a more safe atmosphere. Plus you yourself don't feel like you're, having these hidden private challenges, and so on. So yeah. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, probably doesn't, but the focus of the book and the work is more on the individual level, than the team level. Not that the team level isn't important, but.
Thanks, Ed.
I see as well that Ina shared in the chat, like unless people understand on individual level why is this for them, they will not be responsive to any kind of training on the team level, in my experience. Definitely, because then it's just all about us, me, and they, right? So also like how we can use this in team level. I was doing this even this month, which my workshop, like face to face, it was way easier, but online we can also see. So like you Andy mentioned, we were creating our own scale and checking who is in, where we place ourselves in certain area where we feel comfortable with, and we're not. And then people also exchange the good practices in the area. If somebody felt well with self-promotion and other maybe not, and they had some cases where they need the self-promotion, so they were discussing like, okay, so how can I, for example, help you, or what tool works for me, so maybe I can inspire you. So this is also a great way of starting even this topic in a team. So as most of our participants never had a chance to read the book, I believe that yet, and after our meeting you will read it, because I really encourage you as well to do this. It's also a good way to look at the intercultural way in different ways. So if could, Andy, if you could explain what are the 6 dimensions which for you are the most important, and how we can perceive them itself.
Of the dimensions of the cultural code?
Yes, the culture's code, yeah. So what are the 6 levels?
So the idea here is that any specific situation, I should even get out my global dexterity book here. So here's the book, is what it looks like. I'm in my office here. So the dimensions that we talk about are directness, enthusiasm, assertiveness, self-promotion, formality, and personal disclosure. Those are the key dimensions. And you can, so directness, enthusiasm, assertiveness, self-promotion, formality, and personal disclosure. And the idea is that you could take any situation that you encounter really anywhere, and you can talk about what the zone of appropriateness is in that situation along those dimensions. In other words, how you're expected to act. And I say zone because usually it's not a single point. Like, you don't, let's say it's a scale. Let's say you're conceptualizing it as a scale from 1 to 7. It's very rare that you have to act like that the zone is, you have to be a 3. Like it's more reasonable to say that there's a zone, there's a range, which implies that there's multiple ways to act, but that there are boundaries on that. Like, you can't just act in any way, right? So capturing the notion of norms, and then you can compare what the zone of appropriateness is to, you can sort of juxtapose that against what your personal comfort zone is. And your personal comfort zone is not just going to come from the fact that you're Polish. It's going to come from who you are, in your life story and your life experiences and your personality and maybe your national culture, but it's a subjective score. And so, it gets away from this sort of essentializing culture idea where like all Poles are here and all Germans are here, which I think is really silly. And so that's why I constructed it that way.
Yes, definitely. I heard a lot of time, like, you are not like Polish, or maybe, and your colleague is different. It's like, yeah, because we are different people, right? We have different background, and our zone of appropriateness, like you said, it's way different.
And the other thing is, like, you're not typical Polish, but I mean, if you think about it, even if you believe that there is a normal curve in Poland of how people behave, and that the average of that normal curve is the quote unquote typical Polish person, that means that like 95% of people aren't typical Polish.
Yeah.
If you think about it mathematically. So it doesn't even make sense. The notion of typical, like it makes no sense. These sort of national cultural norms, and so I found those to be pretty useless in my experience.
Yeah, this is a lot of time people just sometimes need this scales, even what we see as a typical or atypical. Then it's definitely, we need to look on this personal level. And this is what I mentioned even before, what I find out, for example, for myself, that global dexterity, is really great for me when I'm working also with younger generations, that they don't want to be, to seeing any boxes that we are putting somebody like, oh, you are here. I say like, no, I'm different. Like, I want to be different. Like, so I would like to be perceived as, in this case, like me, Monika, and you, Andy, right? Not that we are from the same culture, for example, right? I see as well that the message in the chat, like no labeling, right? Yeah, there's so interesting. So we also need to look at this aspect. So I would like to ask our participants if you have any question regarding this area, maybe some concerns which you would like to discuss with us, with Andy. Okay, so okay, we have in the chat. I'm not sure about this, but is the research does they saying that there is no national culture? Can we go for that for? I get that far. Sorry, I'm without glasses. So I read differently.
So I think that would be a very hard topic to research, first of all. So I don't think there are researchers who address that. I think a lot of the national cultural differences emerge from the way in which people do research. So the typical way in which people do research is they collect samples of people from a particular culture, and they get like you take like 150 Chinese students and then 150 American students, and you give them the same test or same protocol, same set of materials, and then you compare the differences, and you do statistics to show that there's a significant difference between the way that Japanese or Chinese people solved this dilemma versus Americans, and that's the cultural difference. And so that's basically how a lot of this work emerges. The whole body of knowledge emerges, and I don't think that there's no cultural differences at a national level. That's not what I'm saying. But I think that especially now with the advent of forums like this, international education. I just walked out of an MBA class. I teach MBA students today. And so my students, I have 27 students, I think, 3 Americans. I'm in the US. I have 3 Americans out of 27. They're all studying with me in the US at a US university. They're going to be working in global organizations. They're going to be going back to their countries. And then you multiply my experience here by like hundreds and thousands around the world. And that's what's happening. There's like sort of like this global professional code, let's say, that seems to be emerging. I think now that's a class thing too. This is people who are cosmopolitans and people who are at the level of doing business in these global organizations. I'm not saying that someone living in a tiny small town in a particular country or culture who only speaks that language and has never traveled and is really a local instead of a cosmopolitan. I'm not saying that person compared to a similar person in another culture, similar local, let's say, wouldn't exhibit different cultural differences along some of the dimensions we talked about. They probably would. But I think it's a lot more complicated than national culture. And, oftentimes other factors trump are more important than national culture. Personality, for instance, that's sometimes overrides national culture.
Yeah, especially like this last time with Robert, there was a lot of question appearing about third country kids, right? So
that too, third country kids. But so I mean, it's way more complex. That's why I don't like to talk about it at the level of national culture, because I just think it's misleading.
Yeah, I see also that in the chat is that Anna said that I believe culture is something alive, constantly changing, right? Difficult to measure or define. So we can see some aspects, but like we are discussing, that we can as well differ. What it's more stable is traditions from from Anna's point of view. But as well here we have one message from Magda, and I believe that this might be also interesting. So she said that there are still a lot of trainings and products out that they are based on the national culture dimension. So how we can use global dexterity and also like combine with this national culture dimensions, if it's possible, what as a trainers, because here we have a lot of trainers and managers, so what we can really do with this?
Yeah, I think that, I think the national cultural differences, I would take the national cultural differences stuff with a grain of salt, in the sense that, you can't sort of assume that someone happens to be from a culture and therefore they're going to exhibit these types of tendencies and behaviors. You just can't say that in 2022. But I don't even know if you could say that in the 70s when Hofstede was doing his work. I'm not even sure about that, but certainly not now. But I think that people find it useful and interesting, and it starts a conversation about culture. I think it's similar to the Myers-Briggs test. If you're familiar with personality, the Myers-Briggs test is notoriously not reliable. It is not reliable. However, it seems to play an important role in organizations to start a conversation about personality, despite the fact that it's not particularly reliable, which is kind of interesting. I think global dexterity fits in, where in terms of, and I know a lot of trainers and coaches who use both materials, because global dexterity helps people learn how to adapt and adjust their behavior. It's dynamic, which is very different from the static idea of national culture. So it's a completely different approach. But I think that they're not. I think they're complementary in some ways.
Mm-hmm. And I agree. For me, also they are very complementary, because when people have even no clue about it, the culture itself and how we can perceive, then we are starting with this, and they are like, oh wow, so there are really some maybe differences, not in the also national level. So then we're coming like, okay, so how you perceive and how you deal with certain situations. So what we can do. Magda wrote like national culture level is a good conversation started. Exactly, but also comes with the risk, right?
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah,
and that's why it needs to be used. It's sort of like, what do they say? Don't use this at home. Like it needs to be used in the hands of a talented, smart trainer or coach.
Yeah, it's a lot of time I heard, even when I look at the LinkedIn and some posts which are mentioned that, oh yeah, because Polish are like this, I don't know, Germans are like this, and for sure we need to take this. I would love to comment and explain that, no, please don't look at it in that way. No, but this is the starting point, like we said, and we are step by step can change this even by organizing this kind of meeting, right?
It's the same thing with Americans. I live in a household. I have a wife and 2 kids. My daughter and I are I would say we're extroverted. My daughter's extremely extroverted, and if you saw her, you might say, oh my gosh, she's so American. Because she'll chat you up and talk with you and smile and make small talk. My son, who also is American, is very shy and introverted. He will not do any of those things. And if you saw him, you would not think, oh my gosh, and my wife too, actually, you wouldn't think they're typically American. So it's silly. It's really kind of a silly, rubric to understand anything with like any level of sophistication.
Definitely, yes. So then it's exactly this typical, right? Who is this? So we need to look at ourselves. And so before we were starting the conversation, introducing ourselves, so Milena, one of our participants, she's moving soon to US. So how she could use, so Milena, I will use your example if you don't mind. So how she can use, the global dexterity, what would be the good starting point for her?
To move to the US?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think it's just like you would moving to any culture. I think it's important to understand the particular place you're moving to, because just like Poland is heterogeneous, right? Mm-hmm. Like Warsaw is not the same as a small town out in the country, and so on and so forth. And the US is that multiplied many times because it's so big, and there's so many different regions, and they all have their different sort of cultural tendencies in a sense. So I think understanding where you're going to be is important. The US is also, people are often surprised. Like if you move to a place like Los Angeles, you'll notice that it's about let's say a quarter white, quarter Latino, Hispanic, a quarter Black, and a quarter Asian. and that is not what a lot of people expect moving to the United States. So you've got a real mix. But then if you go to a town in the middle of the country in, I don't know, Kansas City or something, it's going to be very different. And then where I live is very different. So I think that, looking at sort of subcultures and then subcultures is really important. I think that would be the first step that I would probably take. And then go from there. But yeah, I don't think you can really say anything about Americans, really.
So we said like, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the first it's to experience, to check exactly.
Where are you, Milena? Where are you going?
I'll be in Phoenix, in Arizona.
Okay. Well, I know someone you should speak with.
Okay.
Who's from my collaborator, Melissa Hahn, who I work with on Global Dexterity. She's from Phoenix. So she would be a good person to connect with. If you email me, I could put you in contact. She doesn't live there anymore, but she knows that subculture, that world.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can
You.
practice global dexterity on your cases.
Highly appreciated. Thank you for raising this. Thank you.
Welcome. So do you have any other questions? If there's something maybe coming to your mind, you can share in the chat or you can speak.
I have a question, but again, I'm not sure if you can hear me because of my internet connection. Yeah, is it okay?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, because I'm still processing this. I fully agree that the national level of cultures or overgeneralizing, putting people in boxes, that's not how we should approach it. And I also try not to approach it this way, but also the other extreme of like totally discarding any national or more general trends in groups, rather if it's not nations or other groups. Is also something that I feel like might be a little too much, right? So for me, it's a little bit more of combining this two somehow in a wise way. And you refer to American culture and this being talkative versus being more quiet and shy. Would you agree, or would you say that certain groups or environments support or promote certain patterns more, despite the fact that people might be different, but that environments because how they are, because the group or the environment or the culture, so to say, promotes or supports or values certain approach, regardless?
So Claudia, I think you kind of came in and out with your internet, at least for me.
Yeah, for me the same.
But let me answer your question at least in one way. I've always found that the best way to approach this topic is by situations, as I said earlier, to focus on specific situations and the norms for behavior in those specific situations. So, are we talking about interviewing for a job? Are we talking about participating for a meeting? Are we talking about giving feedback to your boss? Are we talking about having a difficult conversation? Are we talking about meeting someone for the first time and trying to establish an initial connection? A circumscribed specific situation, that's where you can start to become concrete about what the norms, the zone of appropriateness is for the norms in that situation along those dimensions of the cultural code I talked about before. So the whole reason that I created this notion of the cultural code for situations and the zone of appropriateness in people's personal comfort zones, and the fact that their personal comfort zone and the zone of appropriateness are not a sole function of national culture, but national culture can influence it alongside regional culture, organizational culture, and so on and so forth. They can shape it. The whole reason that I created this approach was to avoid this essentializing idea of national culture. So that's the whole point of it. I agree with you that if you like, I don't want to go there. There are different extremes. One extreme is national culture explains everything, and then another extreme is you can't explain anything at all. Right? It's so different. It's like postmodern. There's no there. You can't explain anything. Now, that's not very helpful to people, even if the world is very complex. So you do need some sort of middle ground approach. And so the middle ground approach that I created is to focus on the code. The code, the cultural code in situations is my solution to this dilemma, actually.
Claudia, are you able to listen us, to hear us?
Yes, I did. Thank you. That answers my question. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you so much. So we have as well a question from Anna. I don't know if Andy you saw in the chat. So Anna asked if could you mention some of the best practices when leading a multicultural team, especially when it comes to giving feedback. So maybe how we can use also global dexterity in this aspect.
1 second, I can give you a couple of links. I think that might be the best way to answer the question. Here's one.
So if all of you already have homework, if you would like to get to know more, then you can read as well after our meeting.
One more, sorry. Here are a few, these are a few links that might be helpful. Those are articles that I've written.
Great. So thank you so much, Andy, for the links, and also others can have a look on these links. So there are any other questions? Somebody would like to get to know something more. It's in the chat, nothing is appearing. As I mentioned at the beginning, soon, so yesterday, Andy, I saw that it was also the webinar from Global Dexterity, right?
Yes, exactly.
So if some of you will be eager to know more, what also there was mentioning and presented the tool itself, right? The website, as I believe it was as the previous times, right? Am I right or not?
Yes, exactly. So yeah, so we if anyone is interested, we have a certification course in a community now of over 50 people who have been certified in global dexterity, and our next course is starting October 12th. It's a virtual course, so we have people from around the world. We actually even had in our last cohort, we had someone from Korea who tuned in at 1 a.m. his time, so he was very ambitious. But if anyone's interested, I'd love to have you, or even just reach out to me and I can give you more information. I'm very easy to find on the internet, I think. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn, or you can email me.
Yeah, or you can as well join the webinars which Andy is providing, and find it on your profile. I'm also always inspired by articles and so on. So there is a base of knowledge itself. What's the biggest criticisms you have global dexterity model faced? Oh, Andy, the question to you.
Biggest criticism.
Have you ever heard any?
I don't know. I know it's kind of weird to say that. I'm sure there's been critiques of global dexterity. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't know how to answer that question, actually. No, I'm not saying that it's not worthy of critique. Anything's worthy of critique, but there's nothing that pops up in my mind as a some big criticism that people have. So, but feel free to share with me if you have one. I'm happy to hear it. I'm not against criticism. I just don't have anything that pops out to me.
Yeah, and I see that as well shared that your website, and with the course certification, I also highly recommend. It was a great platform even to get to know other people. Then we are really active in the community, so if anyone has a question, we can discuss together. So it's great. So first, definitely, I hope that after our meeting, you will have a chance to read a book, and then if somebody will be really interested in to join the certification, and of course reading a book, it's part of certification process. You anyway need to gain this knowledge. So I just see also from Magda, just curious, what was the discussion around it? Okay, I don't know if it's related to which part. Magda, if you would like to share, or it was just it was just about this criticism, right?
Oh, about the criticism.
Yes, to the previous question. Okay, so we got it. So last chance for the last questions. If anyone has, you can speak up. Not really. So if you would like, I really encourage you to join Andy's network if you have never done this before. And if not, Andy, I would like to thank you for a possibility to meet you. I'm again sorry for our change with mix up with the hours, the time zones. This is what it's part of global cooperation. So I'm happy that you read my email and joined.
No, I'm happy too. I came up right after my class. I checked my computer.
So I was like, oh my God. And I was, before checking the times, and I was like, oh my God, what I'm gonna tell to others.
I'm glad we could. I'm glad we could still do it. So
yes, I'm glad, and I see that all the participants, that all of you could stay till the end. So I would like really thank you for our being with us, to be engaged, to discuss, and if anything will appear to your mind, you can contact me or Andy. And so we will be happy to share more. And I also invite you for the next meeting. So around the world in a day meetings we run each once per month. So next one will be in October and then in November, so on. So there will be also other people and space to share your experience. So thank you so much and wish you great evening, for some of you, some afternoon.
thanks everybody.
Thank you so much.